Welcome to Inspire Campfire, a podcast where ordinary people tell their stories of extraordinary adventure. These are campfire stories meant to inspire the rest of us to light the fire within, get outside, follow our dreams, and return to tell our own stories. Ready? Let's strike the match.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Scott Wurtzbacher, and I am so excited to share more on Inspire Campfire's first Grand Canyon Mastermind retreat this spring. In last week's episode, participants of the group shared their experience firsthand. This was an immersive, multi-day backpacking experience into the Grand Canyon, and today we're going to hear our backpacking guide's perspective. Andrew Cross with All-Star Grand Canyon Tours is here with us today. Andrew was born in my home state of North Carolina, but being from a military family, he's lived all over. His goal as a backpacking guide is to facilitate experiences that introduce people to the power inherent within the wilderness, foster a connection with the natural world and one another, and create a desire to protect these beautiful places. Andrew is multi-talented. He has a diverse background, and he was an absolute gift to our group. He's here to share his own personal story along with his perspective of our experience together in the canyon. Andrew, welcome to the campfire.
Thanks, Scott. Appreciate you having me on. Thanks for the kind words.
It's so good to see you again. It's been a couple of weeks since we were in the canyon together, and it was just an incredible, moving experience. I don't know. What's it been like for you, having been back from the experience with our group?
Well, there's always, to some degree, it's a normal process of like assimilation that I'm used to now. When I was starting out earlier guiding, and you go into the back country and then you come into the front country, and having that transition would sometimes feel kind of jerky, and like a little bit hard, and you're like, oh, I got to get back. Now it's pretty simple, in that sense. But I will say that, just thinking about the things that we saw in the group and just how, not every trip I get to guide is like our trip. Honestly, what we did is a fairly rare occurrence for me. So in the sense of just like, satisfaction and the possibilities that spin in my mind after a trip like that. There's been a lot of that post trip. But you kind of just get used to like, oh, okay, now I'm back in, the real world, and, let's do that. And when can I get out in the backcountry next?
Yeah, we're always looking for that next adventure. That's absolutely for sure. So I definitely want to get into the trip that we went on together and kind of get your perspectives on it. But before we do that, I want to introduce the listeners to Andrew Cross. So I wonder if you could just share a little bit about you and specifically sort of your journey that brought you to the Grand Canyon. And I know it's probably going to be a lengthy conversation because you've got a lot, but yeah, can you kind of share a little overview of your journey to this point? Yeah,
for sure. I will attempt to do so in a understandable, succinct way, but yeah, for me, I'll briefly touch, growing up, like the outdoors they were a part of our lives for sure. My parents both took us outside, and when I say us, I mean my sister and I. But yeah, we'd visit national parks as a family. We'd go on hiking trips. I love to fish. I've always loved to fish. And that was kind of like my first love, bass fishing in particular. And so, the outdoors and just, being an active kid, playing sports and things, like they were a part of my life growing up. But it wasn't, I would say, like my view of the outdoors at that period up until probably, post college, so my early 20s, the outdoors was like a playground. It was a place to like go out and have fun. And there was always kind of like a means to an end with the outdoors. I was either like doing something with family, or it was to get to a good fishing spot and catch as many fish as I could. And so that was like generally how I viewed the outdoors. And I would say a shift, now, sure, I would still say like the outdoors to some degree is a playground, but it's so much more to me now. And so that shift, took place, and that's really, that shift is what brought me into guiding. But that that shift began, I would say, in my sort of, mid 20s, 24s, 25. I don't remember for sure. I'm 34 now, for people who are wondering. So about a decade ago, I went on a backpacking trip actually with my sister and one of her friends. And my dad always loved backpacking. We did a little bit as a kid, but I'll be honest, I thought it was boring. Like
Okay.
I was far more like interested in like something that was, exciting, or if we backpacked to a mountain lake that then I could fish at, I would be motivated to backpack. But
Got it.
otherwise I was like, I'm just walking. Like what's what's to be interested in just like going for a walk,
Yeah.
or hiking again. Like I would never just go out and hike. My family went. It was like, oh yeah, cool. It's a chance to like connect with family or friends. Um, but I went on this backpacking trip, and by this point in my life, right, I was out of college, I was going to grad school, and I was starting to work some. And so I would say I was like starting to shoulder a little bit the realities or the burdens of like real life. It was
Yeah.
out of the naive college phase. And so I had started to feel, a little bit of that stress, a little bit of that, just the reality of, okay. And that little 3-day backpacking trip, I didn't really have the words for it yet, but I noticed when I was out there, I was like, gosh, like I feel really like peaceful, like this is good. Like life is just simple. Like there's something refreshing about just simplifying life to what you can put on your back, and going out and just kind of having a clear set mission, and doing that. And so again, I don't think I could have expressed it in that way, back then, but I felt it. It was sort of a first like a feeling, huh?
Yeah.
And I remember getting back from that trip and kind of, again, just like, wow, just noticing like that was cool. And then shortly after that, actually, I injured my lower back. I got a bulging disc in my L5S1. I'm sure plenty of your listeners can be like, oh, yep,
Yep.
heard of that
Yep.
vertebrae before. Um, and I'm sure it was from a lot of things, but I was surfing at the time when I like, that was the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back. And that sunk me into about 3 years of constant pain, depression, just a really dark time, in my
Yeah.
life. I can talk about it like pretty, lighthearted now, but yeah, it got pretty bad.
Yeah.
And, I went and saw a ton of chiropractors, physical therapists, got cortisone injections, did the gamut, tried acupuncture, tried various like pain medical specialists. And that was just this sort of like endless cycle for 3 years. And throughout the course of that 3 years, that pain, became such like a stronghold in my mind as well as my body. And it pulled me away from essentially my entire active lifestyle,
Mhm.
anything outdoors, any just like, sports to play for fun. And like I said, I really got into a dark place
Yeah.
and depression. And there's a ton I could say about those 3 years, but in terms of how it relates to this conversation, uh, when I had those things removed from me and stripped away, I began to realize how important they were. I had taken those things for granted. I had taken my ability to be active. I'd taken just an ability to go for a hike for granted. Something that I kind of viewed as like, whatever, hike's not like, it's got to go somewhere. And also just being in beautiful places, like I was living in Virginia at the time, but the ability to like go out west, or the ability to enter into these harder to get to places, I missed
Yeah.
tremendously, and I missed the
Yeah.
activity. And I'd say throughout that 3 years, that was one of the things that just kept me like fighting, rather than just giving up and being like, well, I guess this is just how life's going to be. Keeping on fighting was in a large part like just my love that I felt for those things. And I was really say like discovered, just how important they were to me.
Hey, friend, just wanted to take a minute to check in with you. Is this mastermind group experience something that sounds intriguing to you? Does it sound like something you'd like to do? If you're listening to this episode and want to experience the transformation for yourself, I want to personally invite you to an upcoming mastermind. There's something amazing about nature that creates the ideal space for connecting with ourselves and others at the deepest levels. If you're ready to say yes to adventure, please send me a message. You can find me at inspirecampfire.com or on our social media channels, and I would love to hear from you. Thanks for listening. Like, I love how you said that, like, this is what kind of carried there was a fight in you. And it was like, you know, these challenges, physical challenges, and the depression, and these things that were trying to grab a hold of you, but you had this fight in you that wanted to get back to, specifically what I heard was like the hiking and like just being in the beautiful places. But can I ask you about that fight and what was behind that fight? Cause I'm thinking there's like, you know, this light that really wants to emerge and beat these physical forces that are trying to keep you down.
Yeah. I mean, I would say, even though there were many times where I felt hopeless, it was like a little, you know, candle of hope
Yeah.
burning inside me where it wasn't completely dead. And, you know, I had certainly some friends and community in that time are really important to me. Just when I felt like, you know, I couldn't go on, or that I just was like, you know, kind of wanting to give up, and they'd give, you know, some words of encouragement, or just be somebody to listen. You know, at times, like, they didn't give advice, or they obviously couldn't fix me, but just being somebody I could vent to, you know, was like really helpful. And so yeah, I mean, I'd say it was, you know, probably just like a God-given piece of hope that kept me pushing forward, you know. And it certainly wasn't always easy, and I certainly didn't always feel like I was pushing forward, you know, but yeah, I just kind of had this stubbornness of like, I'm not going to just accept that this is how my life is going to be.
I love that. So when somebody calls me out for being stubborn, I'm just going to refer back to that, what you just said. I love that.
Yeah.
So heading back to the sort of the kind of tail end of this 3-year period where you're sort of coming out the other side.
So yeah, probably a few months, you know, I didn't know it at the time, but a few months before there was kind of this big breakthrough, I watched a documentary series by Ken Burns. It's on PBS, or was on PBS, but I think it's called America's Best Idea, or America's Greatest Idea. And it's a 10-part documentary series about the creation of the national parks.
Oh, nice.
And so I've always loved history, you know, so there's like history and definitely learning in that, but the cinematography and the soundtrack is just like fabulous and really moves you. You know, I mean, Ken Burns is like a famous, you know, documentary guy.
Right.
He's good at what he does, and undoubtedly, like, it moves you and inspires you to get out and see these national parks, to realize like what a unique idea they were back when they were, you know, started. And I remember watching that 10-part series, just like riveted. And I mean, I was in pain at the time. I have this clear memory of laying on my back because it hurt too much to sit. And so just laying on my back on the floor, watching, you know, on my TV, watching this documentary series. And there was, you know, in that particular moment, and there were probably a couple other moments, but I just seen the beauty, you know, portrayed through the cinematography just moved me to tears. And I just remember like telling myself, when I get healthy, or if I get healthy, you know, I'm going to see these places. And, you know, and again, just such a longing, like such a deep longing to get out and see them and be in them. And then, you know, so that was the winter. And at some point, a few months later, you know, I started seeing this physical therapist, and I finally started to try some yoga.
Nice.
You know, people are always like, what, you know, what did it? And I mean, that's a whole, probably another conversation in of itself, but this physical therapist actually talked to me about the neuroscience and the sort of the psychological component to chronic pain. And so there was that to me, and that was like light bulbs clicking a bunch of like, wow, how much this injury has become a psychological thing for me, and almost like a, you know, psychological barriers and strongholds. And then also just the physical reality of, hey, I've been out of healthy movement patterns for years now. Your body's meant to move. Movement is medicine. I do
Yep.
believe that, generally speaking, if it's good movement.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so I'm going to have some pain and some stiffness and tightness because I am not moving well. And so the combination of those things, the psychological with doing the, yoga, this like full body flexibility, mobility exercise, I turned a corner like that. Like people were like, wow, this is like, my friends were like, what is going on? Like, this is miraculous. Like
Awesome. Yeah.
Andrew's been in this dark hole and now, what? And within a matter of a few months, I was back, once from the moment I started that to, 2 to 3 months, fast forward, I'm surfing again. I'm playing sports again. I'm working out again. And, it was a pretty dramatic time.
Was there a moment in all that where you were just like, was there a switch, or did it happen gradually over a period?
No, it really was a switch. It was, so I'd seen this physical therapist. He told me to watch this TED Talk by, Lorimer Moseley was the guy's name. He's a Australian neuroscientist. And so he's got a TED Talk. It was on YouTube. It's probably still there. And I watched this 15, 20-minute video, and how he explained it out, if people want to watch it, they can. But basically how he explained things, there was a thought that just from that podcast got into my mind and said, what if I'm not actually hurt anymore? Like, yes, I have pain, but what if the, physiological problems in my back, or the structural quote unquote problems in my back, what if they've actually been healed? And a large part of my pain now is psychological, along with just lack of mobility and flexibility
Yes.
and strength. And it literally was a thought that just like a light bulb, bam, in my head that night. And I was just like, I'm going to adopt that belief. Like, what do I have to lose? And literally within, I started just pushing myself, and these things that I've been so fearful of doing, doctors, oh, you got lower back issues, don't twist. Twisting puts more stress on your discs. And, all these things that were like, don't do. It was, I still had wisdom too. It wasn't like I just like, oh, let me just go, deadlift 200 pounds because I'm healed now.
Right.
Like there was a process to it.
Right.
But it just literally flipped the switch like that. And within days, I was feeling significantly better. And then, after a couple of weeks, and it just, it was pretty wild.
I love this story. It's empowering. And it's funny, like you and I got to know each other pretty well on the trail, but I don't think I hadn't heard that story before. And I don't know if I shared mine, but I think people that know me probably now know why you and I get along so well, because you just described my story in a very similar way in terms of like back pain and some things that I had to go through. So totally can relate. What was the name of the guy that gave the TED Talks? I definitely want to check that out.
It's Lorimer Moseley, Lorimer. Moseley, as you think it would be spelled. I forget if there's a, MOSE or just MOS, but if you type that in, I'm sure you'll find it.
Cool. So I got that in the Ken Burns, man. I got content to take in after this. This is great. Yeah. So, all right. So Andrew's back. So what happens from there?
So, I'm back. I went on. So throughout this period, that 3 years of back pain, some time, before that. And then once I got, physically healthy, there was still, I was working and things, but I was a youth pastor at the time. I was running a program for about 60 to 70 middle and high school students. And, sometimes like ministry is really hard. Being in full-time ministry, sometimes people are like, well, pastor, it's kind of weird. Or like, what do you do as a pastor? You just write sermons, it's like, you do a lot more than that.
Yeah.
And it's a difficult job, but I think for, your listeners, for, people to like connect and relate more, is the work environment that I was in. It was difficult to set boundaries. It was difficult to ever like put things away. I was in the people helping business. And so anybody that's, listening, that's a counselor, a social worker, maybe some kind of nonprofit. I'm probably missing some doctors, nurses, again, like that, where you're dealing with, real people with real pain and real issues that has a whole nother, aspect of draining and taxing work. Obviously, it's rewarding for the same reason that it's difficult. But, so throughout, I guess where I'm going with this is at that point in my life, through a combination of, just personal struggles that I had faced, with this back being one of them, this back injury, as well as like professional, difficulties or just professional struggles. And then there were some like relationship difficulties and things thrown in there. At the time, I had like undiagnosed anxiety and OCD. And that was, a whole nother process of discovering that, getting help with that, and being in a much healthier place with that. But it was a combination. It just felt like one thing after another, right? With the professional life, sort of a toxic leadership environment there. And, just an environment that was not certainly edifying or like helping, you along the journey.
Yeah.
As well as this, just these personal struggles that were just like one after another. So, where I was at, Scott, was I was pretty burned out at that phase. And I didn't necessarily want to admit it at the time, or fully know it, but I was definitely like pretty burned out between this combination of personal and professional difficulties. And so that spring, so a few months after, I was healthy, but still kind of just like grinding away at these other things, I got invited on a 21-day rafting trip through the Grand Canyon. Nice. And my cousin actually invited me on it. And I was like, at that point, I just felt starved for adventure. I felt starved for something new, for inspiration. And I'd never been to the Southwest at that point in my life, never seen the Grand Canyon, and never even really whitewater rafted. But I was like, wow, that sounds like pretty cool. And so I took my cousin up on this invite, and which I'm super grateful for. And that's what brought me to the canyon in the first place. So I went on this 3-week rafting trip, and it was a life-changing experience.
Yeah. What happened on that trip that was most impactful for you?
So for me, I had never been outside for that length of amount of time, 21 days, no buildings, no electricity. And in that time period, I saw, I would say ultimately it was how I felt, right? The space that it gave me to reflect, the way that it quieted my mind, the way that I felt just a deep sense of, peace out there, as well as, joy and just kind of a feeling of reward, going out. We would do sometimes, physically challenging things, but just again, the kind of like I mentioned, when I did that backpacking trip with my sister years ago, there was just a simplicity to it. And it felt really healing. And that 3 weeks, although starting out felt like 3 weeks, oh my gosh, like what, that sounds like so, it's hard to fathom, like being out there for 3 weeks. But by the end of it, it's like, I don't want to leave. Like, I just want to stay out here. And that, I did, I left, I had to leave. I had to go back to my job in Virginia Beach. I was still a youth pastor. But there were a lot of seeds planted in that experience where I just said, kind of like with that backpacking trip with my sister, there were clues, right? There were these clues that I noticed, and it was in the processing work after where I began to have language for those things. But starting out, they were feelings, they were observations made by me. And, to kind of bring it, I guess, to bring that chapter to a close, I went back, I kind of had this like fire, okay, I'm going to apply these new things I've learned. I'm going to have a healthier work-life balance. I'm going to do all of these things and, kind of get out of this burnout phase that I'm in, this sort of negative, part of my life that I'm in. And And so I went back and, kind of tried to do that for like another 10 months after that. And it just wasn't working. It was like, hitting my head into the wall, some of the, things out of my control in the like professional realm, with the leadership coach. I was just like, I can't, I got to get out of this. This is toxic.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did. And at that point in my life, I honestly felt so numb. I had just, truly like was in a burnout phase physically. I mean, it was affecting me physically, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually, I just felt so empty and so numb and so depleted. And I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to get out of it. It just felt, honestly, that was one of the most miserable feelings I'd ever felt. Like it wasn't just a tiredness. It wasn't just a fatigue. And, maybe some people listening are like, wow, I relate to this. I can, I can connect to that feeling. But it was a feeling of such emptiness and such just numbness. And yeah, I mean, it was terrible. And I was like, what do I do? Like, how do I get out of this? Like, I need help. Like, I realize now the ego, I'm humbled enough that I know I need help, but what does that look like? And how do I get out of this? And the thought that I had, I said, well, I've learned, through these experiences that I've described, that the outdoors is a healing, refreshing place for me. And it's a place that, yeah, I feel this sort of a, deep sense of peace and rest in. And I've also learned that travel, throughout my life, travel inspires me, and travel gives me a wider perspective. And I said, okay, well, I need rest, and I need healing, and I need inspiration. I need to figure out what's next and where do I go from here. And, so I said, well, why don't I combine those two things? Why don't I combine the outdoors with travel? And so I said, I'm going to go on a road trip. It was always kind of this thing that, in the back of my mind, I was like, man, it'd be so cool to like do a multi-week road trip. Like at the time, a couple of weeks like sounded so long and like, whoa. And, going back to that Ken Burns documentary, I was like, man, there's all these beautiful places I want to see. And so I kind of set out from Virginia I had this plan for about a month and a half. I was like, okay, I'm going to do this road trip for, maybe a month and a half, 2 months, which at the time sounded like so long, ended up being 4 months that I was just living out of my car, a Subaru Outback, and traveling. And, I'd meet up with family at times, met up with some random friends on the road that I would meet, people doing the same thing. And so, kind of nowadays, like we call it the van life thing, but I wasn't living in a van. I was living in a Subaru Outback. But so that was the season that brought me out west. I came out west after, during that time, and just never looked back as far as heading back east.
Yeah. Oh man. I mean, and that's probably a whole podcast episode in itself, just talking about what life was like living out of your Subaru Outback for a little bit. Can you give us like maybe 1 or 2 highlights of that experience?
Yeah. You're right. There's a lot I could say about that. Definitely. I mean, the first like week to week and a half was this sort of like, adjustment, assimilation period of like, okay, how do I arrange my stuff in the best way? How do I fit things in a way that's smart? But after that, it just became, man, it was, I mean, one of the best, like most fun seasons of my life, honestly. I would say, a highlight for me was learning. At first I went into this road trip and I had things like, sort of planned out. I was okay, I'm going to spend, 2 days here, and then I'm going to camp at this campsite, and I'm going to, reserve ahead, get a camp spot here. And then I'm going to go to this park, and then I'm going to go, and I had for about a month and a half, a fairly tight schedule. And after a couple of weeks of trying to do that, I was like, gosh, I feel like I'm a slave to this schedule. Like, I feel like I'm working again to some degree, where I feel like a slave to something outside of my control. And I, I was gaining some confidence of just like, okay, I know how to like find free campsites or sort of, get around this, or, hey, if I got to sleep in my car in the, in a Walmart parking lot once, like, okay, I can do that. Like that, these sort of fears, you realize these fears of the unknown as you start to face them and encounter them, you realize, oh, okay, that's not really that big of a roadblock. That's not really as big of a fear, big of a concern as I thought it would be. And so after a couple of weeks, I more or less, like, through that whole schedule that I had, obsessed over for months, just kind of threw it by the wayside and just started freestyling on the road, I call it. And man, that was just, it's kind of like a flow state almost. It's like a
Yeah.
flow state of living on the road. And it was a blast. It was a
Yeah,
blast.
it sounds like early on you were kind of almost like swimming upstream a little bit, and then all of a sudden just figured out a way to just kind of go with it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that's cool. So I know that you also had a little bit of time in wilderness therapy, and so to kind of to bring this all together, where does that fit into this?
Yeah. So wilderness therapy, I had gotten into guiding basically through, the quickest Spark Notes version is during that road trip. In those moments, really, I started solo backpacking in that time, just short backpacking trips, but by myself. And I had said, how numb I was. And in those moments, I began to just feel again. In the wilderness, I began to feel, and I began to just feel like my soul was being healed and restored. Not to get too woo woo about it all,
Yeah,
but
I love it.
yeah, I mean,
Bring it.
that's how it felt, and uh, and I just said, "Gosh, this is so profound." Like, I want to facilitate these experiences for others because I know there's a lot of people who are, feeling like I was feeling. I know there's a lot of people on a track to that, that I could see. I could think of so many people that I knew, and I was like, "Man, they need this." Not to mention all the,
Yeah,
people I don't know
yeah,
who need something like that. And so that was sort of the genesis of, like, okay, I want to start guiding. I want to develop those skills. I want to get in. I want to see, like, what's out there, because surely, there are other guides and other people who have had something similar, an experience similar to this, and want to facilitate this for others. And so that's what got me into guiding. After I'd guided for about a year, I got into wilderness therapy. And so I was guiding more early on what we'd call like outdoor education. So there's
mhm,
sort of like outdoor leadership focus trips. Oftentimes they're with teens, but not always with teens. And so it's kind of like a different sphere of guiding. But yeah, wilderness therapy, right? That's the therapeutic side. And because of my own personal experiences, I was like, yeah, I want to check that out. What is it like? How do these companies run these things? And so I did that, and gosh, yeah, I mean, we could have a whole podcast about
yeah,
wilderness therapy, and both, the industry side of it, as well as, what I learned from it and what I think the takeaways to the general populace are. Because, wilderness therapy is generally seen, at least in these like wilderness therapy companies, as, sort of like a last ditch effort, for people who are dealing with substance abuse or, mental health issues. And it's great. I mean, I saw truly, life transformation in that populace, in that industry. But there were a lot of times where I thought, okay, the structure of how this is run is great for somebody who's basically hit rock bottom. But what about the people who are functioning, but they're struggling with some degree of burnout, or they feel stagnant. Maybe they're not burned out, but they just feel stagnant, and they're like, okay, I feel like I'm missing something, or there's something more. I need a chance to catch some new vision for my life, and run after something. And so that's kind of, where I was like, okay, how do we bring this to the general populace? And I mean, that question, I think, is something you and I are talking about, Scott, and, it's
absolutely.
still something I'm exploring and kind of discovering as I go.
Yeah, I think it's such a good point. I mean, you talked about wilderness therapy as being something that is for or has a tendency to be for people that have hit rock bottom. But you're right. I mean, everybody has their struggles and their challenges, and there's a place in the wild for everybody. But sometimes, like, we don't self identify that until we hit rock bottom, right? But it's like being able to use our own experiences regardless of where we are in life, like, it's always healing, and everybody's got something that they're dealing with.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So here's the cool thing, like, your life journey up to this point and everything that you've shared, you know, one could look at it and say, okay, youth pastor, then, living out of your Subaru Outback, and then doing some wilderness therapy, and you had some jobs before that. And maybe it's hard to see at the time how some of these things, like what the thread is that's kind of tying this all together. But all I can tell you is from my experience, like, we had some time to talk before this Grand Canyon Mastermind retreat, but I mean, we really got to know you on the trip. And so my experience with you is through this mastermind retreat. And what I see is this person that's brought all of these elements of life together in this very, very meaningful place. And like, we just had, I mean, it was such an impactful trip that we had together. And it was like, as I said in the intro, I mean, you were an absolute gift to us. And the multi-talented features that you brought, like, not only were you just an exceptional guide on the physical journey, like keeping us safe, knowing how to talk us through, how to place our feet, how to walk down the trail, like all that piece. But, this mastermind also included the inner journey as well. And the way that we were able to kind of connect in that piece, and the depth that you brought to the inner journey as well. And I think, as a youth pastor, as being in wilderness therapy, it was incredible. And you also are an incredible chef, as it turns out. So, I guess I just want to talk about like all these kind of how all these sort of things have come together for you.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the compliments. Yeah. So I'd say for me, Scott, actually having you validating and saying, hey, I see how some of these different areas of your life are coming together is actually really impactful for me, because for the last few years, there have been times I'm like sitting out in the middle of nowhere and I'm just like, what the hell am I doing out here? Like, how did I wind up
Yeah.
out here?
Yeah.
With, sometimes it'd be like sitting around a campfire with a bunch of addicts, with wilderness therapy. And again, I'm just kind of talking, off the cuff, and you're just like, and you're hearing these like crazy stories, and you're just like, man, how did this happen?
Yeah.
Or there just be, kind of, self-doubt for sure. Or, just like, am I doing the right thing? Am I going in the right direction? Is this going to lead to anywhere? Like, here I am, like I'm in my 30s, like guiding is generally, a younger person's industry, or a younger person's job. And I'm like, okay, what am I, where is this going? Like, where am I going with this? But I would say within the last year, I've started to see those threads starting to come together. And I've been having, just increased like belief. Okay, wow, I really do see how this is all coming together. And, the puzzle pieces, sometimes I describe
Yep.
this like, I'm seeing
Definitely.
these puzzle pieces coming into place. And I'm starting to potentially see that bigger picture come into view. But there's still, there's still discovery to be had, and there's still self-doubt to be faced. And so I appreciate you saying what you're saying, but I think I am starting to find a sweet spot of tying these things together, and it's pretty exciting.
Well, we're super grateful. The Grand Canyon Mastermind is super grateful for all of those experiences that you had, that you were able to bring together for us. So, wonder if we could kind of pivot to our group and talk a little bit about that. I'm just curious. Again, like I talked last week with the group and got their perspective on and their outcomes, and I know it was transformational for all of them. But I'd love to hear just from your perspective, sort of what you witnessed. Maybe we start with like, the vibe of the group, because of course you've led lots of different groups, sort of the vibe of our group as we started, and then like, what sort of transformations that you saw take place.
Yeah. So, how I would probably relate it to is this idea of the hero's journey. Have you ever heard of that
Yes.
concept?
Yet another reason why listeners are now going to know why you and I connect, because we talked about the hero's journey on this podcast. Love it.
Yeah, the hero's journey. I mean,
Yeah.
you may have talked about it before, and people can Google it, and there's some different like versions of it,
Yeah.
But for the sake of this, mastermind trip,
Yep.
I've kind of processed it and viewed it, as a bit of this hero's journey. So, we had our heroes, the two couples, who came, and in the start of the hero's journey, right, there's a call to a challenge, or there's a
Yep.
call to adventure, and you essentially gave them that call, when you created this idea of the mastermind and put it into place. And that's still the known, right? And so, I would say, like, with the group, you could tell, I mean, there were questions being asked, there was some little bit of nerves and trepidation, but I would say there was confidence too,
Yeah.
of like, okay, we've trained, we've done our thing, we've got Scott, we've got Andrew, we've got our guide, like, okay, we're gonna do this. And so there's always kind of, I don't want to call it a facade per se, or a front, because that carries like a negative connotation, but
Right.
there's always, like, I'd say, with groups and with guests, there's always kind of this outward show of like, okay, maybe we're a little nervous, and I can admit that, but like, we're confident, we got this. And then the challenge starts. Grand Canyon is just such a amazing area, and part of the reason I love it so much is it's rugged, man. It's a challenge. It's probably one of the most challenging places to do a backpacking trip, in the
Yeah.
country.
Yeah.
And uh, and so once we started, one of the things that makes it so challenging is you're going down, you're going down into a mile deep canyon, to a mile
Mhm.
deep ditch, basically. I mean, it's way more than the ditch, but 5,000 feet down. So most people are used to, okay, if you're hiking, you're going down a little bit, you're going up a little bit, you're going down, and so you're using different muscles. But this is just bam, you're just going straight down for 7, 8, 9 miles, depending on what trail you are on,
Right.
5,000 feet. And that's a quad burner, that's a knee burner, that's it's hard, and then
Yeah.
on the flip side, when you're coming out, it's all uphill. And so for the group, when they began to face the challenges on that first day, that's like the hero's journey. Okay, you step from the known into the unknown, and once you get into that unknown, there begins to be challenges faced, and there's some self-doubt. There's, oh gosh, are we going to do this? Or, and I'd say, like, within some of the group, there were those questions
Yep.
probably in their minds being asked, like, oh gosh, what the hell did I get myself into here?
Yeah.
And and so that's how it is, right? I mean, isn't that how it is in life a lot of the times? And so I saw that, and that's where, in this idea of the hero's journey, right? There's mentor figures, there's external help that comes to these heroes that helps, propel them beyond those challenges. And so it's not only the hero discovering what's inside of them, but also, I'd say, connecting with forces outside of themselves, something bigger, whether it's other people or something supernatural. And so that's where I'd say, you and I, in some ways, probably played that, a little bit of kind of mentor, outside help, for the guests. And they also, though, dug into themselves, because they were all amazing people,
Yep.
and, had certainly, had developed themselves a lot throughout their lives, through self-awareness, and through, building perseverance. And so it was this cool combination of them, really diving into themselves, as well as being open to outside help and outside advice. And so, I saw that day one certainly ended with, I mean, it was a challenge,
It was.
but by day two, right, we got some good food in ourselves. We got a good night's sleep. And it was like, okay, I think there's, like, I could see the belief in the group of, like, okay, we did the hardest part. We can do this. And it's always so amazing to see when that psychological kind of switch flips and people begin to have self-confidence and belief, what that then, I mean, one, just how that affects the dynamics of the group. People are more lighthearted. There's some more jokes. You feel it. It's a tangible thing. Uh, but also then how they began, because again, all of them are super intelligent people. They began very quickly starting to make the connections in their mind. And draw the metaphor out of it. And that for me is like one of the funnest, most rewarding parts of a trip, whether it happens on the trip or it happens after, and it's usually some of both. for me as a guide, seeing those light bulbs click is awesome.
Yeah, totally. And I can't underplay one of the things that you said. Like, obviously we got to the bottom. It was hard. We were tired and we ate. We got some food in us, right? But this is where I need to just stop for a second and plug, like, this is going to sound like an advertisement, but I need to plug you and All Star Grand Canyon Tours, because we ate so freaking well like, we ate better on the trail than I eat at home. I mean, it was awesome. Like, the planning that went into this, from your guys' standpoint, and, what you prepared for us, what you guys had packed for us. I mean, we were like, I think we were assuming we were going to be eating freeze dried stuff on the trail. And like, that was so far from the case. We were eating fresh food, fresh vegetables, like fresh. I mean, it was fabulous. And that played a huge part. It was an unexpected extra for sure. Like, but it played a huge factor in like keeping us strong, keeping us healthy, and giving us just that little bit of joy after a really, hard hike.
For sure. Yeah. You never go hungry with All Star. And if you eat good, you feel good. It's as simple as that.
Yeah. So another piece that I was really grateful for was, the inner journey element. We'd have some conversations prior to the trip, and you guys knew going in that, we wanted to do this backpacking trip, but we also wanted to integrate this inner journey. And I think you kind of already alluded to it a little bit, but I was super grateful to you. And I do attribute some of this to your experience as a youth pastor and being in wilderness therapy. But like, we had some different inquiries and activities and things that we did along the way, and you were just able to bring so much depth. And I was just like, it was amazing the way you were able to bring some things in. And one of the things that I loved was, you knew when to answer questions and when to just kind of leave things hanging a little bit. Because for the inner journey, sometimes it's like, a question might get asked and a quick answer might satisfy them in the immediate moment, but like maybe dragging some of that out and not directly answering some of those questions might enhance the inner experience a little bit. I was wondering if you could just talk about that, because you did that so beautifully.
Well, thank you. Yeah. So for me, we in our modern world today, we live in this culture that is obsessed with control and certainty.
Yeah.
And I say this, and I don't remove myself from it. I acknowledge how it affects me, and how I also grab and grasp and struggle for, control and certainty. And I think, more so now than any other time in history, we can at least have the facade or the belief that, okay, we can control things, because we have with technological advances and things. I mean, sure, we can definitely control more aspects of our life and environment than any other humans have probably, throughout history. But that being said, anybody who has had a sudden, tragedy happen or just something unexpected, I mean, we all realize, okay, at the end of the day, we don't actually have that much control. That's why I say it's a facade of it. And, I don't necessarily think like some of these ideas, like, oh, saving for retirement. Okay. That will hopefully give you some control over, your life as, an older person. Like, yeah, I'm by no means am I saying like, we should never do any of these things. Let's all be hippies and live in the woods and have a commune or something. I'm not taking it to that degree. But the reality is in life, if you don't learn how to deal with the uncertainty and you don't, develop maybe some of those character attributes that help propel you through the hard times that we're all going to face, then, I think your quality of life is going to be diminished. And so, how do we develop some of those skills and learn to deal with some of that uncertainty, and then also use those moments of uncertainty as windows into self-discovery.
Mm.
I think in the context of the mastermind, that's what I was, hoping to facilitate is, okay, when you're faced with this uncertainty, you're in an unknown environment. You don't normally go into the Grand Canyon. You don't normally carry a 35, pound backpack on your back. You don't normally, walk for 8 hours in a day. So when you're doing these things that are unknown and uncertain, what comes up within you? Where do your thoughts go? Where do your emotions go? What comes up? And just having the self-awareness of that, and then like I said, using that as a window into potential self-discovery. And so that's, I'd say that's, why I did what I did. I would say I've learned that through wilderness therapy, through, just the own things I've contemplated in my own life and my own mind, and just teachings and things I've gathered over the years, life coaching to some degree. I know you're a life coach. I think the life coaching model is something I had some training in. And again, a lot of that's about like letting people come to their own conclusions, asking questions that will, rather than telling, you're asking questions rather than telling them what to do. And so, I'd say it was kind of a combination of all those things, but that's why we did what we did. And knowing, sometimes you got to tell people what's up, and again, certainty is not a bad thing, or having details is not a bad thing in of itself. But when we become so reliant upon it in our society, I think that's where some of the problems arise.
I love it. And it was magic. So I guess I'm curious for people listening that are like intrigued by this experience that we had together. How would you sort of summarize the learning and growth like within our group? And then like, what could other people sort of expect?
Yeah. So, I know I can't wait to hear the podcast with the, with the 4 couples that I consider friends, or excuse me, the 4 people, the 2 couples that, I consider friends now. I'd love to hear their perspective on it all. And there's funny people. I'm sure they've got some good one-liners about it as well. But, I'd say for them, like, I know they're hungry for more of it. They saw the benefits. I know on the trail, as we were coming out on that last day, the conversations they were having about, okay, how, these things that I've learned, how I'm going to apply them to life, how I'm going to write a blog about them, how I'm going to pass this on to others. And so sort of assimilating that knowledge back into their businesses, their personal and professional lives. I remember another group I took out like last year. It was a group of business owners, and there's a whole story behind it that we probably don't have time to cover. But I remember one of these guys who runs a successful landscaping business, what he experienced on that trip, in the wilderness. This was another Grand Canyon trip. He literally just had the quote. He just said, "This is going to absolutely change how I do business, like how I run my business." And I mean, again, to me, stuff like that is just music to my ears, because it's like, this is, it's not just about coming out and having a great experience. Like, we want to have a great experience, but in the bigger picture, so what? It's meaningless if we, in my opinion, it's meaningless if we don't apply it to make a better world and a better society, and improve our families' lives, and improve our personal lives, and so the whole "so what" is a big thing to me, as opposed to just sort of this consumer mentality of, hey, let's go have as much fun as we can. Let's have as much fun as we can, but let's make it purposeful as well.
Oh my gosh. So well said. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I know you're going to be doing more of these masterminds, which I think is awesome, Scott. I'm excited for more of them. People can certainly experience this stuff on their own, just by going out in nature, going visiting a national park. And, I think those are key experiences as well. Those were some of my own stories of just sort of this own personal journey of it. And then that being said, I also think there's a lot a lot of benefit in doing it with a group, and doing it in an intentional setting like you have, created, and in, a setting that I seek to facilitate and create, because that really does create, I think, it raises the bar of what can be done when you have, people who are intentionally seeking to create and facilitate an experience like that, and sharing that with others, right? Sharing that in the context of community.
Yeah, totally. Well, Andrew, you have an incredibly bright future ahead. I know that there's going to be a lot more from you. But I just am so grateful for what you brought to this experience. And I know just looking at your life up to this point, like there's so much magic there. And I know that when Hollywood gets a hold of your story, they're going to want to make a movie about your life. And when they do, what I want to know is who's going to be the Hollywood actor that's going to play you in this movie?
Oh, yeah. Well, I guess I'd have to probably say Bradley Cooper.
Yeah, I knew you were going to say that. Somehow I just knew. Perfect.
Yeah, I mean, actually, it was funny. I think it was Gina. I forget who exactly, but somebody on the trip said, "Has anybody ever told you look like Bradley Cooper?"
Okay, there we go.
And I was like, "Yeah, I mean, I have got that a few times, although it's been a while since I got that." So,
Okay.
yeah, I take that as a compliment for sure. And he's a studly guy. So I guess I'd have to, I don't always see it. I'm like, I don't know if I look that good, but okay, I'll take your word for it.
Well, we're going with Bradley Cooper. What's your movie going to be called when they make this movie?
I think it'd be called A Subaru Runs Through It.
What? That's awesome. I
A
love
little
that.
play off of, the fly fishing, a river runs
Oh,
through it.
man, that was perfect. A Subaru Runs Through It, starring Bradley Cooper.
Bradley Cooper,
That's
yeah.
a movie. That's an Oscar
Maybe
winner
we
right
could
there. I
get
can't wait to
him
see
up.
it. Andrew, if people want to get in touch with you or All Star, what's the best way for them to do that?
So, you can Google All-Star Grand Canyon Tours. I'm a big Googler. Scott, you can probably put links, and things
Cool.
as well. I should probably get in line with the 21st century. I don't have a LinkedIn. If people want to follow me on Instagram, I post that's kind of my life, I'm just personal and professional life. You can follow me, andrew.m.cross. That's on Instagram. You can probably put that link in there too, Scott. And I'll send out my email address to you as well. And so people can get in touch with me. I always love to connect, with people that either can relate to some degree of my journey or, have ideas and like, wow, I really want to be on, have an experience like this. How do we make that happen?
I love it. Well, just thank you again for just touching us the way that you did and just being a part of that whole experience, the physical journey, the inner journey, and for feeding us so well. It was so great. And for those listening, I hope that you've been inspired today as much as I have. I hope Andrew's story has encouraged you to listen to the voice inside that calls you to adventure, because we want to hear your story next. If you have a story to tell or just need a nudge to create one, please send me an email. We'd also appreciate it if you'd help us spread the word by leaving a review and sharing or tagging Inspire Campfire in your social media. And until next time, I want to encourage you to get outside. Thank you for listening. Andrew, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you so much, Scott. Thanks for being who you are, just generating these ideas.